So that's why it's otherwise, it's planning the way to do that. Yeah, I think the whole process is, and I don't think that's, and I think they have enough time to be able to start. We'll have some that I'm trying to accept. Those folks will have but I mean, the planning also we had a conference call for the first one. Right.
Check. One.
But I think we've got some hands that serves he was really getting and that's why, for example, what I realized is that revolution. So we decided to I think that's right. And I mean, and it's bolstered by we really have to use our decision. Now, on the other hand, it was very interesting that some of these people that have said well, I mean, in the sense like, there's 8 years of no problems. And they really got
Well, but I'm thinking about it.
I think so. Actually, I forgot. Got sidetracked. It's amazing. I would also. So it seems to me that what we ought to be doing is we should want to start see what these another guy. Yeah, well, good. I mean, right. Yeah. Just colors. The other part is I think it would be easier if you lay out sort of and also we have again,
have a seat here if you would.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning to all of you. My pleasure to welcome you to the Directors Forum with Hunter Rawlings, the President of Cornell University. We're delighted to have him with us, delighted also to have his wife Elizabeth with us as well. The relationship between religion and the state has often been at the forefront of the American dialogue. Our founders were adamant that no religion be imposed upon the American people, just as they were adamant that all Americans have the right to practice religion as they see fit. We're once again in the midst of a period of vigorous debate about the role of religion in our society. From the halls of justice and government to the halls of primary, secondary, and higher education, Americans are wrestling with important questions. Today, we're pleased to hear the view of one of the leaders of American academia, Hunter Rawlings, the president of Cornell. He became the 10th president of Cornell University in 1995. He served as president until 2003, and then returned to the office in July 2005, agreeing to serve in an interim capacity until a new president is chosen, and I think that president has been chosen now. As president, one of his top priorities has been ensuring that Cornell's many parts function together more effectively as a unified whole. No easy task in a sprawling and influential research university. He has also taken significant steps to strengthen Cornell's undergraduate teaching, diversity, and programs in engineering and science, with notable achievements in medical and life science technologies. Trained as a classics scholar, indeed he told me a moment ago he's going to return to the classroom to teach Greek and Latin in a few months. He received his PhD from Princeton University, and I'm happy to note that he was a Woodrow Wilson Fellow there. He joined the faculty of the University of Colorado as a professor of classics. There, he rose to become chairman of the classics department and then vice president for academic affairs. From 1988 to 1995, he was the highly successful president of the University of Iowa, where he bolstered undergraduate education and programs in healthcare and medical education. His talk today is entitled Intelligent Design and the Place of Religiously Based Ideas in American Politics. Dr. Rawlings, we welcome you to the Wilson Center. We look forward to your remarks. After his remarks, we'll have a Q&A, question and answer session. Dr. Rawlings.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a great delight for me and Elizabeth to be here this morning with you at the Woodrow Wilson Center, which is a great home for scholarship and also for public policy discussion, and furnishes a number of us with opportunities to talk about topics like the subject of religion in politics, which, as Congressman Hamilton said, is one of the most vibrant and today one of the most pressing issues that we face in American life. And I'm pleased to be able to address that topic with you this morning. On March the 4th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln delivered the most moving and probably the most significant speech in American history, his second inaugural address. Lincoln used his presidential platform to give an anguished rumination on the purposes of the Almighty and the consequences for Americans in both North and South of practicing slavery. The second inaugural is, as many have pointed out, essentially a sermon. Its biblical, indeed prophetic rhetoric has had a powerful effect upon all subsequent presidential speech-making, which struggles, never successfully, to emulate it. In spite of our constitutional separation of church and state, America's chief executives rarely deliver a major address without a direct appeal to God. In that same epochal year of 1865, Ezra Cornell and A.D. White founded Cornell University as a new kind of American institution of higher learning. Unlike its predecessors like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia, Cornell was to be a non-sectarian university, an asylum for science, as President White wrote, where truth shall be sought for truth's sake, where it shall not be the main purpose of the faculty to stretch or cut science exactly to fit revealed religion. The charter of Cornell stipulates that persons of every religious denomination or of no religious denomination shall be equally eligible to all offices and appointments. And President White, in his plan of organization for Cornell, emphasized, and I quote, that we have under our charter no right to favor any sect or to promote any creed. No one can be accepted or rejected as trustee, professor, or student because of any opinions and theories which he may or may not hold. On that point, our charter is most carefully guarded and made to conform to the fundamental ideas of our republic, ideas which too many institutions of learning have forgotten. President White consciously modeled Cornell's chartering documents on the principles of the American Constitution. In short order, critics attacked Cornell for its liberal spirit and began referring to it as a godless institution, where theories such as materialism and evolutionism received an impartial hearing. Sound familiar? And yet, godless Cornell soon had a large and impressive Christian chapel built in the center of its campus that could accommodate 500 worshipers. President White called for a lectureship in Christian ethics and weekly services offered by what he called the most eminent divines obtainable of all faiths, including Catholic and Jewish. Religion held a prominent place in the curriculum of Cornell, the calendar, and the architecture of the campus. So it continues today. Cornell is a center of science, engineering, agriculture, and humanities. And it is also home to thousands of students, faculty, and staff members practicing their faith in campus buildings. 28 religious groups have registered as members of Cornell United Religious Work, the umbrella organization that coordinates faiths on campus. Religion is a force at Cornell today, just as it was at its founding in 1865. My point this morning is this. Even when Americans deny the state establishment of any religion, prohibit religious tests for public office, and never so much as mention God in their Constitution, and even when leaders with such consciously anti-sectarian views as Ezra Cornell and A.D. White found a center for scientific thought and reason, what has been called the first truly American university, religion is nonetheless omnipresent. Today, in the midst of what history will probably call the third Great Awakening in American history, we Americans are seeing a massive movement of religion back into the public square, particularly in the crucial arenas of politics and education. Abortion, stem cell research, and intelligent design are just three of the prominent issues revealing the power of religion in local school boards, colleges and universities, municipal governments, state legislatures, and the Congress and the White House. A month ago, 55 Democrats in the House of Representatives issued a joint statement clarifying the central role Catholicism plays in their policymaking. President Bush makes constant reference to the faith that governs his life and thought, both public and private. If corpses can do such a thing, my favorite founder, James Madison, is turning in his Virginia grave. Madison sincerely believed that together with his political partner, Thomas Jefferson, he had once and for all separated church and state in America in the 1780s and early 1790s. In drafting the revolutionary clause on freedom of conscience in Virginia's Declaration of Rights, in defeating Patrick Henry's bill for a religious tax by publishing the Memorial and Remonstrance against religious assessments, in pushing Jefferson's bill for establishing religious freedom through the Virginia Assembly, in helping to author the Constitution, and in drafting the First Amendment, Madison made separation of church and state his first principle. Far from supporting Patrick Henry's and George Washington's belief that state support of religion would improve the morals of American society, Madison argued adamantly and repeatedly that yoking church and state together had been disastrous throughout history for both religion and the body politic. To use religion as an instrument of civil policy is, in Madison's words, an unhallowed perversion of the means of salvation. Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful phrase. An unhallowed perversion of the means of salvation is Madison's term for the use by civic leaders of religion for political purposes. Furthermore, Madison argued state support is detrimental to religion and to the body politic. Christianity flourished in a pure state in its early centuries, before the Emperor Constantine made it Rome's official religion. In subsequent centuries, the state-established church produced, and I quote Madison, pride and insolence in the clergy, ignorance in the laity, bigotry and persecution. When Virginia passed Jefferson's statute for religious freedom, Madison triumphantly wrote to Jefferson in Paris, "I flatter myself we have in this country extinguished forever the ambitious hope of making laws for the human mind." As President of the United States, and a wartime president at that, Madison strictly observed the separation of church and state. He opposed public support for chaplains in the Congress. He avoided appeals to God. Late in life, he even regretted that he had called for a day of public thanksgiving during the War of 1812. Madison believed that the state should deregulate religion. His formulation is, religion is wholly exempt from its cognizance. Madison predicted correctly that such a policy would enable religion to grow and thrive in a free republic, where people of all faiths and of no faith feel equally treated. Ezra Cornell and Andrew D. White had the same vision for Cornell, a secular institution where religion flourishes on its own. And yet it has proven impossible to separate church and state completely. Why is that? Politics is in large part a function of culture, and at the heart of culture is religion. Richard John Newhouse wrote 3 decades ago, as he worried that the public square had become naked, that is, shorn of religious belief and values. Newhouse, as it turned out, had nothing to fear. But Madisonians do. Evangelical Protestantism has in recent years become ever more potent in American public life, while the voices of secular humanists become ever more strident in their reaction to religious rhetoric. This is a badly polarized state of affairs, as we have recently seen in national debates over the case of Terry Schiavo, abortion, stem cell research, and the opposition of Darwinism and intelligent design. What is the right way out of this polarized situation? Let us begin by acknowledging that Madison was wrong. The state must take cognizance of religion. It is too important a source of ideas and values to ignore or to privatize completely. Religion shapes most Americans' values, aspirations, beliefs. In some, their identities. The history of this country reflects the simultaneous development of grassroots democracy and evangelical Protestantism. The two have gone hand in hand, often reinforcing one another. The problem is that the absolutist tendencies of religion frequently become incompatible with democratic pluralism and the need for give and take in politics. As Reinhold Niebuhr warned, the religious imagination is as impatient with the compromises, relativities, and imperfections of historic society as with the imperfections of individual life. How can we ensure, then, that religion will inform and improve policy debate, but not polarize? And equally, if not more importantly, how can we Americans protect our faiths from becoming political religions, unhallowed perversions of the means of salvation, to use Madison's memorable phrase? These are, in my view, two of the most pressing questions we Americans confront today. To answer these questions, we should acknowledge that religion has sometimes embarrassed itself by confronting science on its own ground. When the Catholic Church took on Galileo, it passed a short-term sentence on Galileo and a long-term sentence on itself. When intelligent designers go to court in the 21st century, they should be prepared for rigorous cross-examination. Judge John Jones found in the case of Kitzmiller versus Dover Area School District that intelligent design was religion masquerading as science. In the Shivo case, right-wing legislators entered a legal battle armed with religious political convictions, only to retire ignominiously in the face of scientific evidence and public opinion. Science keeps hypothesizing and testing results. Its theories succeed or fail with the discovery of new evidence. Religion emanates from authority and can thus appear arbitrary and ill-informed in the realm of policymaking. For this reason, religion linked directly with state power tends to be repressive and exclusionist. In his day, Madison inveighed against the Inquisition because that was an example his audience well understood. Today, we have Muslim theocracy daily before our eyes. But it is easy to point out the dangers religious power poses to the state. It is a subtler argument to demonstrate the dangers state power poses to religion. When people of faith use their religion for political purposes, they run the risk of compromising their ideals and politicizing their religious values. Roger Williams was the first American to raise this problem in the mid-17th century in Rhode Island. An ardent Puritan, he warned his fellow citizens against mixing church and state, because the result would make the church too worldly and give it a political agenda. For the church to remain pure and faithful to its mission, it could not, in Williams' view, consort with politicians. Americans today find Williams' rhetoric and his practice extremist in its complete renunciation of any ties between church and state. But many American Christians find the intense political engagement of some Christian churches not only embarrassing, but an affront to their conception of the church as a spiritual home, not a partisan political actor. As Niebuhr showed, public demonstration of piety can corrupt private faith by transferring religious rhetoric to the political realm, thus lowering and cheapening it. It is bad enough when religious leaders make political pronouncements. It is worse when government leaders use the church for partisan advantage. Niebuhr wrote, "The religion which is socially most useful is one which can maintain a stubborn indifference to immediate ends, and thus give the ethical life of man that touch of the absolute, without which all morality is finally reduced to a decorous but essentially unqualified self-assertiveness." The paradox of religion, this is Niebuhr speaking, the paradox of religion is that it serves the world best when it maintains its high disdain for the world's values. Its assets easily become moral liabilities when it compounds the pure idealism of Jesus with the calculated practicalities of the age and attempts to give the resultant compromise the prestige of absolute authority. Religion is most effective, then, publicly, not when it joins with the state and speaks prescriptively, but when it acts in what Niebuhr called its prophetic role. Faith can be a great moral force to reform society when government and science fail, as they often do. Madison's beloved Constitution did not end slavery. The abolitionists, and then Lincoln did. Civil rights finally came for African Americans, partly because secularists called for it, but primarily because Martin Luther King and his Southern Baptist colleagues demanded it on religious and moral grounds. It takes a wake-up call from Catholic bishops to get Americans to confront the problem of serious poverty in our midst, even if only briefly. In the same way, we can be certain that the issue of abortion will not be solved on the basis of scientific definitions and legal procedures alone. Science and the law have little to tell us about the meaning of life. That is the domain of religious sensibility and moral sensitivity. Abortion is the most divisive domestic issue afflicting America today. We academics have consistently misunderstood and undervalued religious arguments about abortion, much to our own and the nation's detriment. Our inability to appreciate the role of religious conviction in discussing abortion is probably the single greatest cause of our diminished role in public policy debate. Most academics are secular humanists. That is neither surprising nor especially noteworthy. But academic disdain for religion, specifically for Christianity, is noteworthy, and it has unfortunate consequences. Such disdain diminishes the capacity of many academics to understand American culture and politics, and thus lessens their influence in the public square. It is thought-provoking to note that although it is liberals who have moved America to an ever more inclusive definition of humanity and human rights over the past century, it is now anti-abortion advocates who are calling for expanding our conception of human life. This is the religious voice speaking, like abolitionists in the 19th century, while on the other side, liberal academics seem often to accord more respect to animal rights arguments than to appeals to the rights of the fetus. By the same token, I would sympathize more with arguments from faith about the beginning of life if those who made them showed more interest in moral arguments against ending life. Whatever side one is on in the abortion debate or in the debate over the death penalty, two things appear clear to me. First, religious views will play a large role in the outcome. And secondly, each side needs to show greater respect to the moral basis for the other side's arguments. When I ask myself how religion should inform politics, I keep returning to Madison and Lincoln. Madison spent a lifetime trying to ensure that this country would avoid Europe's long history of religious conflict by separating church and state. Our Constitution and our Bill of Rights do as much as legal documents can do to assure Madison's success. But his could be only a partial victory, because religion cannot be long kept out of the public square in this or any other country. The largest, deepest issues require religious engagement for political resolution to become possible. This country's greatest crisis, the final confrontation over slavery, needed, in the end, religious understanding, a national benediction after a national tragedy. Presiding over civil war and incalculable suffering, Abraham Lincoln composed for his second inaugural address a national sermon. Though he found it impossible, in spite of great effort, to believe in personal salvation, and Lincoln never did, he never joined a church. But Lincoln did read the Bible every day as a source of strength and of powerful poetic language. Borrowing the language of the Old Testament prophets and of Christian mercy, he tried to help his fellow countrymen understand the meaning of the Civil War in their history. Unlike most subsequent presidents, Lincoln did not claim that God was on either side in the conflict. He did not even claim that he knew what God's will was. To him, the Almighty was inscrutable, a force that seemed to bring much suffering, personal, as repeatedly in his own case, and public, as in the case of the American people. But Lincoln, in his anguished pondering, did know that we Americans had committed a great sin and that we were paying for it. He also knew that people call upon religion to serve their own purposes. Both North and South read the same Bible, said Lincoln in the second inaugural, and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. But it was clear to Lincoln that neither North nor South was on God's side. The Almighty has his own purposes, said Lincoln. If we shall suppose that American slavery, notice American slavery, not Southern slavery, American slavery. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. That is the prophetic voice of religion, speaking from the White House. Madison would probably have found that more than worrisome. Given the arguments I've made in this talk, I certainly do. For the President of the United States to make God the central figure in his inaugural address is to join church and state bluntly and inextricably. It sets a dangerous precedent, as we have seen in the addresses of many a president of the United States. But let us note two deep mitigating factors that make Lincoln's choice defensible, even to separationists like me. First, the nation was torn by civil war, its very existence imperiled. Second, Lincoln used religious thought and language with remarkable restraint and care. He was as uncertain in his claims about God's will as he was in his own religious conviction. He refused to enlist God's aid in the struggle of the Civil War. He made no claim of personal understanding. He once said to a group of abolitionist ministers imploring him to do God's will and end slavery that he had no direct divine revelation. I must study the plain physical facts and learn what appears wise and right, said Lincoln. Lincoln did, however, know Scripture, backwards and forwards, and its power to assuage suffering and to create moral clarity. And he used it adeptly to grasp the meaning of what Americans experienced. In fact, to define that meaning. Religion serves society best when it acts with restraint and when it speaks with a genuine prophetic voice. The state serves religion best by allowing it to function freely on its own, and itself best by listening to the voice of religion and enabling it to contribute to the resolution of critical moral dilemmas. To disdain religion is to antagonize and radicalize many Americans with deeply held beliefs. To use religion for political purposes, to create political religion, is an affront to religious values and a violation of the great American tradition established by James Madison and deepened by Abraham Lincoln. Thank you.
That's very well done. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Rawlings. You may stay at the podium or take a seat, whatever you prefer, and we'll open it up for questions for the few minutes remaining. Are there questions from the audience? He's given us a powerful speech, I think, and a very thought-provoking one. There, Larry, go ahead.
Thanks. You spoke about academic disdain, especially for Christianity. From your experience at Cornell and other campuses, could you rather specifically tell us what you're seeing that amounts to academic disdain, especially for Christianity?
Yes, I could enlarge on that a little bit. What I think is unfortunate in the polarization that we see today is, on the one hand, a very vibrant, very forceful evangelical Christian movement in this country, which has entered politics on many, many occasions. And on the other hand, often a reaction against that movement which shows little interest in it, very strong opposition to it, which is perfectly understandable, but little interest even in those who feel very deeply about their religious beliefs. And I think that on many college campuses today, there's great interest in Buddhism, there's great interest in Islam, there's great interest in many of the world's great religions. But there is often an embarrassment, frankly, in dealing with Christianity on college campuses, for reasons that I think we can all well appreciate, but I think it serves us poorly. And I think we see that in very few courses being offered in Christianity on many college campuses, and in a real inability of many of us academics to take Christianity seriously as something to be thought about and studied in the academy. I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions to that. There are very important exceptions at Cornell as well as at other institutions. But I do think that it's difficult for members of the academy to talk seriously about Christianity, particularly in classes that ought to engage it.
Okay, Maria Stella, there are a couple of questions in the middle. Go to Flip and then the gentleman in front of her.
Thank you. Just to pick up on that question a little bit, you mentioned that you thought that this would be described as a third grade awakening, and other commentators have suggested the same thing. Might you, from the vantage point of the campus, talk about why you think this is a moment of the third great awakening, and in light of that fact, what the universities might do to prepare their students to go out and perhaps utilize their religion to inform their politics, but to understand that there should be some separation between the two?
Well, I particularly appreciate the second part of your question, because I think you define rather nicely what I hope will be the case. That is, that religion will inform politics but not create the kind of polarization that I think we see today in American society. I think campuses should actually begin to take this subject much more seriously than they have in the past. And I think, for example, faculty members should engage students who come into the academy with very strongly held beliefs in a way that treats those beliefs seriously, not as something simply to be reformed in the first couple of years of college so that you can go on to study other things, but as something that in fact informs the classroom. And if you take the debate over intelligent design and evolution, you see a good example, I think, where now there's beginning to be some sense that you do have to engage intelligent design in the academy because it's an important force in America today. But where do you engage it is one large question. Do you engage it in science courses, treating it as a science? I would say no, because I don't think it is a science. But I think one should engage it in humanities and social science courses because it's an important phenomenon in American society today. All you have to do is look at what's going on in school boards and across the country in many states where the intelligent design movement is very aggressively moving forward to try to present intelligent design as an alternative to evolution. I myself think that intelligent design doesn't do very well when it confronts science on the ground of science. And I think that's where the Dover, Pennsylvania case was so important. The judge's opinion is very carefully written, very well written, it seems to me. On the other hand, to act as if intelligent design doesn't exist or as if students don't think it's an important thing for them to think about is, I think, mistaken.
Yes.
It seems to me that there is a clear disengagement of younger people in their 30s, perhaps down to college age, from organized religions. Would you agree with that? And if you do agree with it, what do you think is causing it?
Did you say clear disengagement?
Yes, disengagement. Far fewer people in their 20s to 30s seem to be interested in pursuing any I would say organized religion. I don't say that they're not spiritual people. I just think organized religion.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't really have data to give any kind of reasoned sense of what those numbers look like or what the trends might be for those in their 20s. I can say a little something about trends on college campuses, that is for students in their late teens and early 20s. I see actually quite strong interest among students, even in northeastern elite colleges and universities, in organized religion. And I tried to cite the figures from Cornell of 28 separate religious groups registered on campus with Cornell United Religious Work, and that's because there is indeed potent student interest in organized religion. Many students come to us from families that have, in fact, very religious lives, and that's why I think we're seeing, for example, very large and vibrant Korean Christian Bible groups on campus, meeting frequently, being very open in their activities. We see many Jewish students practicing their faith on a regular basis in very large numbers. I think we see quite a vibrant life, religious life, on campuses. I think Ezra Cornell would be very proud of that, very pleased to see that. Multiple sects worshiping as they will on campus. So I don't see any fall off there, probably in fact some increase in that age group.
Question here.
Thank you. Could you expand or expound how the lessons that we've had in this country can help us deal with the problem of radical Islamists and with thousands of people being killed and continuing to be killed, and how do we understand that, cope with it, and ultimately perhaps help bring about some kind of change where converting to religion is not a death sentence.
Well, you raise, of course, a very difficult global problem, and one that I certainly don't have any special wisdom on. I am reminded of Madison looking at the history of the Christian church and seeing many very large problems in it, and thinking to himself that many of those problems were caused by the fact, in his view, that the Christian church had been very closely tied to government ever since Constantine made Christianity Rome's official religion, and in Madison's view that it had many, many very disturbing consequences, including the Inquisition, which after all had its own horror. So if one is to look at things from the Madisonian perspective, which I always try to do at any rate, then it seems to me that the separation of church and state is a very good way of at least attempting to deal with that very difficult problem. On the other hand, it's quite clear from the history of Islam, I think, that tying church and state together is a fundamental value. And so far be it from me to say to someone else with a very different tradition, here's the way you must operate. I think that's a difficult position to take, given the very different traditions. So I think it's a tough dilemma, and I'm sorry I don't have any great answers to your question, but I think it's a very important one.
Yeah.
Prior to Cornell, I was at Yale in the era when the president and Governor Pataki and others had the opportunity, which I took, I don't know if they did, on Sunday mornings to hear the late Reverend Sloane Coffin in Battelle Chapel use the force, the power, the majesty of religion in Battelle Chapel to inform on social issues of the day, far to the left, perhaps, rather than to the right, as one might find today. The force was so powerful that students, that in my memory, brought their dates on Sunday mornings to Battelle Chapel, the same way they would take them to the Yale Bowl for a football game. So such was the power of a chaplain with strongly held views. With his passing the last week or two, and with your remarks, I'm trying to position in my own mind whether Brewster properly defended him from criticism that he was misusing the chapel, or whether this is the proper role for a person of strong views within a university.
That's a great question, and you bring up someone who's obviously had an enormous significance, and it certainly did for me when I was going to school myself at that time in the 60s, when he was speaking out so forcefully and so ably. I think, frankly, that as Ezra Cornell said in founding Cornell, bringing eminent divines, I love that phrase, to campus and having students and faculty members and staff members come to their sermons is a great, great thing. Could it inform young minds subtly? Yes. But my view is that's something we should all be in the business of in academia. We should be informing minds, and we should be opening up minds to as many different influences as possible. And it seems to me that's one very good influence to bring in front of students, faculty, and staff. So I would not only defend that practice, I would be a strong supporter of it. Now, that doesn't mean everyone must go to those services. Many will not want to go to those services. Many Cornell students, for example, do not want to go to Sage Chapel, which is the large chapel in the middle of campus, because it is clearly a Christian building. And I can understand perfectly well why students who are not of Christian faiths don't want to attend services there, but they attend services then in their own buildings. And that's as it should be. But I think strong voices from whatever side are good for students to hear.
Okay, there's a right here.
Hi, I'd like to know your opinion about what you think. You've been addressing issues on religion sort of stepping into the political realm. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the political realm entering the church or the synagogue or mosque on a systematic level. And I think we, in the 2004 elections, we heard a lot about this, an actual, the preachers or religious leaders bringing politics to the people in their places of worship.
Yes, and I noticed in this morning's paper there's a case now in Ohio where the IRS is actually being brought in to test the question of whether certain churches have stepped over the line and have lost their religious exemption from taxes, for example. I think that's a very very dangerous thing to do. That is to bring government into churches. And as I said in my remarks, to create political religion, I think, is mistaken first on religious grounds, because it violates the serious purpose of religion, I think. And it has to be done then with great, great care. Madison believed that the state should entirely leave the church alone. And I subscribe to that belief. When you mix them, it has to be done with great care. As I tried to say in the case of Lincoln, mixing church and state directly from the President of the United States is a very, very dangerous thing to do. But he did it, I think, not only properly, I think he did it in ways that I just have tremendous respect and admiration for. But I think that Madison's phrase, an unhallowed perversion of the means of salvation, is a good term, frankly, for the misuse of religion for political purposes, because it's to confuse means and ends. And to me, that's the fundamental mistake being made in that case. And I think it really is an affront to the strong American tradition of separation in church, of church and state.
Okay, question over here and then here.
In this debate, are those who favor separation not at an inherent disadvantage, since those who oppose it seem to oppose it on moral grounds, whereas those who favor separation seem to rely at heart on pragmatic grounds? And in looking at the American religious scene today, how much of an exaggeration would it be to quote Yeats that the best lack all conviction and the worst are filled with passionate intensity?
I think that is a real problem today, and I think your point is well taken. I think those of faith who want to bring faith into the public square do so with very strong moral conviction based upon that faith, whereas those who want to keep it out often seem legalistic, as I think you're implying, or simply seem to be disdainful of the role religion can play in the public square. So yes, I think it is a somewhat uneven battle right now, and that's why it's quite clear that evangelical Christians have made a lot of progress in the last few years in the political realm. I think some of that is dangerous, because I think it does mix improperly the church and the state. But to complete the answer to your question, I think it behooves those of us who feel strongly about separation, nonetheless, to appreciate the role that religion can play, very much for the good of this country or any other, and to find ways to talk about that less defensively and in terms that are reasonable and respectful of the other side. And that's where I find, for example, even intelligent design deserves a hearing, not a scientific hearing in my view, but nonetheless a hearing in the sense that many Americans quite clearly think that God had a serious role, not only in the creation of what we see around us, but in the development of what we see around us. I take that view seriously.
Okay, we have a question here, and then we'll finish with a question here. There are a lot of hands up. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. We'll take two more here.
While this addresses the intelligent design as well as the marketplace and everything else, but taking the opinion of the other side, whichever the other side is, seriously, only works if they're willing to address your side. And if you take somebody on a picket line in front of an abortion clinic, or someone, you want to discuss intelligent design in a philosophy class, and they wanted to replace the biology class, and you're speaking here, you're not speaking at Bob Jones University. Mm-hmm. So how do we reach out to engage the other side, as it were, in this dialogue?
That's a very good question and a fair one. I think one of the places you do it, obviously, is in the law courts. It's unfortunate when it has to go to the courts, but it does. And in the case of Dover, Pennsylvania, it went to the courts in the end because it became a very extreme issue. And the judge, I think, rendered exactly the right decision. But it has to be fought out, in my view, in school boards, locally, because education is a really important battleground right now. And there is a there is a group that is bound and determined to get intelligent design into curricula across this country. And the way you do that is not through the Congress or Washington, D.C., it's through local school boards, because we govern schools locally. And so I think it behooves the other side to pitch in and to oppose. I hope not with an extremist point of view, but with a reasoned point of view. So I think it needs to be played out in exactly those arenas that you're talking about.
Okay, there's one other question here. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the speech. It was very interesting. The only minor point that I had, which is sort of a quibble, and I'm not sure it does change your overall point, and maybe you'll tell me if it does, about 6 blocks from where we are right now is the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, which has a plaque outside that says, "This is the church that Lincoln regularly worshipped at," and tied his horse and buggy up to this little stanchion here. And I've passed it many times and thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I don't know whether he was formally a member, but at least they seem to suggest he was a member. And when you said, in looking at him as one of the two people who inform where you come at this, it surprised me a little to hear that he was not a member of an organized church. And whether he joined there or not, if he did attend regularly, and I wasn't there, so I don't know, does that change somehow where you get to and how you use his precedents?
That's a great question. He did attend not only that church, but others as well. He did not, as I understand it, join any congregation. Yeah. And he did not ever quite come, as I understand it, to a full belief in personal salvation in spite of many efforts to get there. He struggled. He struggled long and hard. So the fact that he did attend worship services on occasion doesn't really change my view, but it does add to the point I was trying to make, that he was a regular reader of the Bible. Not just a regular reader, a really serious reader of the Bible, in a way I wish I were. This is someone who believed that was something that should inform his thinking quite regularly. So what does that mean about Lincoln? What does that mean about Lincoln as a religious figure? Well, it's a really interesting question. I think the best book written on this was by Alan Guelzo, Abraham Lincoln, Redeemer, President, which is a very subtle and careful effort to understand Lincoln's religious beliefs. And in a short time, I can't do it justice, only to say that I think Lincoln grappled with belief all his life. He worked seriously at it. And anyone who does that, to me, is a very religious person, whether or not he or she joins a particular congregation.
Okay, yes, final.
To my knowledge, you're one of only 3 college or university presidents in this country who've come out and made a formal statement about a position on intelligent design. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about what compelled you to do that, and whether you think your colleagues, other presidents, should have done so or ought to in the future to make their positions clear on their campuses.
Well, let me begin by saying, and I think this is probably important, that I did so as an interim president. You have a little more freedom as an interim president, so I don't want to claim the great moral standard here in this case, but you're right, several other presidents have spoken out. I think it's actually more than 3, but it's not a lot more. And the reason I think presidents tend not to want to get into topics like this is it, first of all, seems a little beyond their purview. Why are they of special wisdom on a matter like this? But then the reason I did want to get into it is that, to me, it is a really, really important thing educationally now, not just as a political matter, but as an educational matter. And when I see efforts to bring intelligent design into the curriculum of schools as if it is a science, I think it needs to be opposed. Because it's not a science, in my view, not at all. It's true, it makes good criticisms of Darwinian evolution. That's good, to point out some of the gaps in Darwinian evolution. It doesn't vitiate the theory. Evolution is held up beautifully. It continues to make remarkable discoveries every month. And so, to me, that's a scientific theory that's not only held up well, it's one that continues to produce an amazing range of new discoveries. ID, so far as I can tell, hasn't made one single scientific contribution. Not one. So I have trouble calling it a science at all. So I did feel it was important to speak out on something that is entering the realm of education there, at least to have some reason to think I can say something.
Dr. Rawlings, let me take the prerogative of the chair for just a moment and ask a final question. You've described yourself as a strict separationist, and I presume by that you would not want government money flowing to religious organizations. How do you feel about the charitable deduction? Should that be knocked out because that encourages people to give to religious institutions?
Well, I think private giving to religious institutions is quite wonderful, and to academic institutions as well. So any way of encouraging that, it seems to me, is good, because it's also encouraging a sense of altruism, a sense of giving to something larger than yourself. But I take your point. Nonetheless, if government is somehow trying to influence individuals in this way, it has a certain danger. My guess is James Madison would be opposed to it.
Do you think so?
Well, it's hard to know because we can't ask him, but he was so strict on this issue, and the reason I think he was so strict is not because he had any hostile views to religion. I just don't think that at all. But I do think that he always felt that the opportunity for religion and the state to join together to oppress is something that must be prevented in every possible case, because they're going to do it anyway. That is, religion and the state are going to get together anyway. Mm-hmm. He's not naive enough to think they're not going to at all, but you've got to do everything you can to be on your guard against that. So you do the best you can, and he certainly did the best he could.
Dr. Rawlings has given us a marvelously stimulative morning. Let's thank him for it as we conclude.
Thank you. This one right here. I think it is. We will publish it in several different ways. Is that okay? That's fine. It doesn't have my name on it, so you should probably put my name on it.
We'll take care of that.
Okay.
I won't attribute it to James Madison or anybody else.
Now, that would be fine, actually.
Your interest in Madison, I've always been fascinated by Madison. I said in a speech the other day that I don't think it'd be possible for Madison to get elected to Congress today. You know, he's a very small man, had a high-pitched voice, and wasn't very attractive looking.
No charisma.
No charisma. Terrible on television.
Terrible. But you know, he wrote all those anonymous papers. They were so just